Welcome back to Uncovering Dark Falls, the podcast that moved here for cheap housing, but stayed for the missing persons reports. Now listen, the mud was squishing under my foot, and I looked down in disgust as it threatened to take my boot. I mean, I've always been more of a gumshoe than a mud shoe, but I prefer to have some pavement to pound when I'm doing my investigations. But I've been told that this is a local spot with a lot of history. But I'm wondering though, how much history could be in a swamp? I wasn't sure, but I knew that I needed to find out. Fever Swamp may have a lot of scientific and, natural relevance, but as the bugs were starting to sample my sweat and the mud was sampling my boots, I was really hoping that somebody would just turn it into a parking lot soon. But before the bulldozers come in, however, I needed to learn the sad fate of some local kids who got a little too close to the swamp and its inhabitants. I needed to find the Hermit.
No one knows how long he's been there, and no one bothers him if they can help it. But he's been here for as long as anyone can remember. Though I suppose it couldn't be the same guy.
Miss Dark, that's the librarian for the Dark Falls Public Library. We've met her before. Well, her and I have become fast friends in the short time that I've been researching the town and the mysteries that surround it. When she assured me that the Hermit had to be someone different than when she was a kid, she got this look on her face that told me she didn't even believe it herself. Miss Dark knows more than she's telling, but she's a lady that I don't want to push. She's spooky, with a capital S, if you know what I mean. But, dude, she makes good cookies. And her and Mr. Messer, my mailman, we've met him before too, they've become staples at my impromptu front porch meetups. She seems to be keeping an eye on Mr. Messer, probably to make sure he doesn't spill any more childhood stories like before. She had talked at length about how Fever Swamp was this bug-infested hell, but it had its secrets.
It all started with a strange howling at night. Then it was the animals he would sometimes find on the outskirts. Rabbits and deer that had been torn to shreds. Everyone thought it was Grady's new dog. After all, he looks like a wolf. Even Grady thought it might be Wolf, his new dog. After all, the dog disappeared at a strange time and could often be seen howling at the moon.
I asked, "Who's Grady?" And the warm day suddenly became a little more chilly. Miss Dark smiled, and I could see far more teeth in that grin than I ever wanted to.
Why, Grady was a boy I grew up with. A boy who lived next to the swamp until one day went missing.
I asked, "What happened? Did he get lost in the swamp or something?" Miss Dark shrugged and went on to say,
Only one person knows for sure, but getting him to talk could be a little bit difficult.
Mr. Messer choked on his teeth a little bit.
Lucy, you aren't trying to send Mr. Gideon to speak with that old hermit, are you?
It seemed that Miss Dark was indeed trying to send me on a little skirmish into a fever swamp. She claimed there was a man who lived out there, a man who was older than any man had a right to be. A hermit that existed within that swamp since before anybody could remember, and he kept a lot of secrets about the town. Now, by now, secrets are something I have an interest in, and speaking to this man seemed like it might be worth a few bug bites after all. That was what I thought before I started trekking through this godforsaken mud hole. Miss Dark may not know why they call it Fever Swamp, but, I could venture a guess. I imagine that anybody who's dumb enough to come in here would soon find themselves with a pretty nasty case of malaria to go along with their curiosity. Regardless, the only bug that I had caught was of the curiosity kind, and I intended to trudge through the swamp until I found this old gaffer and had a little gab session with him. I didn't think I was going to do it for a minute. I mean, I had started in the early morning, and it was coming up on lunchtime, with me still looking for this old man of the swamp. I could feel the PB&J that I had put into my pocket earlier, as it made the inside a little wetter than I strictly liked it. And I decided in that moment, you know what, dude? I don't think I'm going to find this dude. I don't think it's worth looking for through all this gunk that I'm walking through. So I decided to turn around. And that's when a voice from behind me made me stop in my tracks.
Who's there? What business have you in my swamp?
Now I hear this voice behind me, and I quickly turn around so fast that my flannel shirt opens up behind me and it looks like a tiny little cape. And I find this ragged-looking old man with his foot cocked up on a fallen tree trunk, like it was the most natural place for him to be. I could believe that this guy had been here since the founding of the village, and I could even maybe believe that he had been there longer than that. His hair was long and white and tangled, and his clothes looked like he had made them out of reeds that grew on the banks of the swamps. He was even hogging all of the 5 teeth that he had to himself in this downcast and haggard-looking mouth. Mostly, it was his eyes, though. He had the eyes of someone who's seen far more than he has any right to, and he wishes that he could expunge those thoughts. I said, "Wow, you must be the Hermit of Fever Swamp." You know, having no thought as to what this dude perceives himself to be. Whether he knows that people call him that or not, I don't think I cared in the moment. I was just surprised and relieved to finally find this guy.
Well, I'm certainly not the tour guide.
He said that without ever cracking a smile or anything positive or welcoming. I said, "Miss Dark said that if I came and found you, you might have a good story for me. Was she right?" The old man seemed to chew on this idea for a while, and I wasn't entirely sure that he liked the taste. But eventually, he says,
Come back to my cabin. We'll have a little palaver, and we'll see what sort of answers you might be after.
He then turns around and heads off into the swamp like it didn't really matter if I followed him or not. And after a little bit of contemplation, I decided to actually follow him. You know, despite my PB&J messing up the inside of my pocket. It wasn't like I had a lot else to do, you know what I mean? I came out here to find this dude and to learn something, and I think I was about to. I was curious to find out what the old man might or might not know about the swamp and this mysterious boy named Grady that Miss Dark told me about earlier. Now the cabin, it was nothing to write home about. It was just a shack that, it looked like it was made out of logs that were harvested from the swamp itself. It was a damn poor thing to find yourself in the wintertime. But, I suppose the old guy probably didn't care much. He took a seat on a long wooden bench on the porch, and he began tearing off strips of some sort of jerky before seeming to notice that I was even there at all. He eventually starts and says,
You want to know about the werewolf, don't you?
Now this was the first time I'd ever heard the word werewolf out here, so it seemed like he knew what I wanted to hear more than I knew what I wanted to hear. I don't know, man, I couldn't explain it. But, I wasn't going to say, no, don't tell me about the werewolf. So I just asked him to continue on. He chuckled. There was some spit that flew off of his lips. It was pretty gross. And he says,
Oh, sure. Everybody wants to know about the werewolf. That's a local legend, after all. What would you do with the information if I was to tell you?
I didn't feel like explaining to this dude what a podcast was, and how I was going to share his story with you listening now. So I decided in the moment, and I still feel bad about this, but I lied. I've been very honest and collaborative, at least in my best efforts to learn the mysteries of this town and share them here with you. But, in this moment, in this swamp, my pocket was wet, my boots were dirty, I just wanted to, expedite this whole experience. I decided to lie. I said, not much, I suspect. I just like to collect local legends like that, but I usually just save them for my own curiosity. He seemed to like that answer, and as he got a little more settled in, he told me a story that I wasn't sure that I really believed. It was a story about a boy and a dog and a terrible curse that surrounds Fever Swamp. The old man told me how Grady and his sister Emily had been forced to move to the outskirts of the Fever Swamp by their father. Now, their dad was a scientist who was trying to study the environment of the swamp on this group of deer, I guess, that he had pinned up in cages behind their new house. It was for some scientific merit or something, I don't know. But, the kids just knew that they had just moved from a large city to the outskirts of a swamp, and they weren't vibing with it. So one day, they had decided to explore the swamp, having not much else to do, but they got lost pretty quick.
The swamp's tricky to outsiders. They're lucky I found them, or they'd probably have never made it out alive.
That entire sentence he said while swatting flies away from his face. I don't know how he would, intentionally move out here and live out here like this. It just continued to blow my mind the longer I sat there and the more we talked. The two siblings had come across the same shack that I was now sitting at. But when they went in to see if anybody was inside, they also met the hermit that I was now hearing the story from. Their meeting, though, wasn't as, let's call it as cordial as mine had become, and the hermit scared the crap out of them dudes, so they ran for their house like their lives depended on it. They get home, they tell their parents about the encounter with the hermit, but their dad hears the story and they say, no, don't worry, dude, the old man out there, he's probably harmless. Just try to leave him alone. Eventually, maybe sooner than later, it doesn't take Grady very long to make friends. And soon, his new friend, Will, tells him about a strange girl who often ends up in the swamp and how the swamp is named after a disease that the residents picked up many, many years ago. The, quote, fever was supposed to cause madness and death and wreckings. The old hermit probably has it because everyone in town thinks he's crazy.
Maybe they're right. But I'm the only one who seems to know the truth, so what does that say about the rest of them?
That night, Grady woke up when he heard a howling coming from somewhere outside. He does his best to ignore it, figuring he'll investigate in the morning. And as he explores the outskirts of the swamp the next day, he finds another new friend. He was startled by a dog, but it turns out the pooch is actually friendly. His dad says he can keep it, and Grady names him Wolf because he looks like he actually might be part wolf.
Soon, Wolf was following Grady and his friends into the swamp on their explorations. But even though he was a stalwart companion during the day, at night, he wanted to roam alone.
Roam alone, he said. And I couldn't help but think that sounds like some sort of, dark comedy where Julius Caesar wakes up and his villa is entirely empty. For the exception of 2 senators that are trying to kill him. I didn't let that get to me, though. This hermit was pretty intense and trying my best to be respectful. I learned from this hermit that night, the family was awoken by a loud racket. Now, Wolf was not a house pet, and he began making a ruckus until the family was forced to let him out. Grady worries about his new friend, but when morning time comes and the dog returns, he feels a little better, right up until they find the mutilated rabbit. Everybody blames Wolf, saying he must have done it. This big-ass random dog that you just found probably was the one that killed this rabbit. But Grady is pretty quick to defend his new dog. However, one person believes him. Now, the mysterious Cassie O'Rourke who's the strange girl that Will talked about, tells Grady that it wasn't a wolf that killed the rabbit. It was a werewolf. She says that the Hermit was the werewolf of Fever Swamp, and at night he roams the woods and kills for sport.
They came to spy on me. 2 kids and a dog ain't real great at hiding.
He said that, and he probably looked guilty as sin, too. He had been hunting, and there was a freshly killed turkey hanging off one of his shoulders, and the blood on him was fresh.
Even so, I told that boy not to trust the dog. Something off about him. And I warned him what good, but he didn't listen.
That night, however, things go from bad to worse. One of Grady's dad's prized deer is killed, and Grady's dad blames Wolf. He doesn't want to separate the two. He can tell that Grady and this dog are bonding in a way, but his intentions are clearly to take the dog to the pound. Grady, however, has other ideas. He lets Wolf go, telling him to run into the swamp, and Grady is left with the hope that Wolf will stay gone. Later that night, he hears the howling again, and he goes out to find Wolf hanging around the backyard. Now, Grady's afraid that if his dad sees Wolf, he's for sure going to get rid of him, and Grady tries to run him off, but he ends up following him into the swamp. There, he discovers that Will is also sneaking out. Will says that he was investigating some howling that he had heard, and he invites Grady to join him. Grady tries to stick with Will, but he loses track of him in the dark. And suddenly, a werewolf jumps out, catching Grady by surprise. Now, as this creature attacks, Grady recognizes the distorted, monstrous face, and the thick neck, and the broad shoulders. He can tell that the werewolf is Will. The monster bites Grady, but Wolf appears all out of the sudden, dude. It's like one of these action movies, and he attacks the werewolf, scaring him off. As Wolf comes to check on him, Grady slips into unconsciousness.
That boy was very lucky. He didn't realize which dog I was talking about. It nearly cost him his life. I got him home, though, safe and sound.
When the kid regains consciousness, he finds himself back home. He learns from his folks that the swamp hermit carried him back to safety. Grady tells his dad about what happened in the swamp, and Dr. Tucker decides to check up on Will to make sure he made it home safely as well. When he goes to the house where Will is, supposed to live, he finds the house is unoccupied, abandoned, and in desperate need of repair. Grady continues to explore the swamp with Cassie and Wolf, the hermit watching over them as they explore. A month passes, and Grady finds himself staring up at a full moon. He comes to understand that when Will bit him, he became a werewolf too. Now, whenever there's a full moon, Grady goes hunting in the swamp.
Now, on full moon nights, you can find Grady and Wolf still running in the woods, hunting for whatever might cross their path.
I was genuinely speechless for a moment, looking at the swamp with this newfound interest and a certain amount of trepidation. I asked the hermit, "Are you saying there's an actual werewolf out here in the swamp?" And the old hermit laughs a little bit, and he smiles wolfishly, and he says,
Who's to say you aren't talking to one right now?
I left him at that, and I made my way carefully out of the woods. It was still early in the afternoon, but I suddenly found that I wanted to be as far away from the swamp as I could get before nightfall. I hadn't paid much attention to the moon patterns, but I wanted to take no chances of getting a first-hand glance at this werewolf of the swamp. A personal interview would probably have ended with me torn to pieces and my own story added to the local legend. So that was that. That's the story of the swamp. Listen, as I was making my way out to this place, I drove past what looked like some sort of summer camp, and you'll never guess what happened. My phone shut off. If you've been listening for, regularly up until now, then you know that means something is up with that camp. Now that I've figured out this swamp thing, or at least, well, I shouldn't say figured out, but now that I've learned as much as I want to learn about this werewolf of the swamp over here, I think I'm going to drive past that camp and see what kind of mysteries it holds. I'll bring my digicam with me so I can get a photo. Wish me luck. Hey, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Uncovering Dark Falls. It was a lot of fun having some friends on as the voices. Mr. Messer was, in previous episodes and in this episode was voiced by one of the writers, Dr. Plague. He also voiced the Hermit as well. I'm a big fan of this dude's, acting. Very cool. And Lucy Dark was back as well. She's played by Lady Spookaria. Lovely, Australian, very sweet. Hey, consider joining the Patreon. Man, it's $5 a month. I know everybody has a thing that they want you to join. We do too. I mean, it costs money to produce the show. And any support is immensely appreciated, man. Again, it's $5. It gets you early access to some things, behind the scenes content, and voting privileges, dude. Pretty cool. And if you're not like a Patreon person, it's cool. I get it, man. I'm willing to bet though, whatever platform you're listening to this on has some sort of comment option or share option. Pick one of those. Let me know what you like about the show. Let me know what you don't like. If you've got nothing to say, then just share it with a friend. Cool, that's it for now. See you next week.
Uncovering Dark Falls is written by David Caleb and Dr. Plague. Created, produced, and narrated by Darek Weber.